My name is Morgan Riley Carver. I am 33 years old. 6 weeks ago, I left my family's home in Rochester, New York, without uttering a single word. It wasn't out of spite, nor was I trying to make a point. It was simply because my father, Samuel E. Carver stared directly at me and said, "You've ruined this family." The rest simply agreed in silence. My mother averted her gaze and began gathering up the dishes. My older brother, Preston Carver, leaned back with his arms folded as if judgment had been pronounced. My younger sister, Tessa Carver, kept quiet, but as always, she didn't have to speak. That Saturday evening, I left behind the casserole I had made, the financial documents I'd prepared, and the silence I had endured for 33 years. There was no yelling, nothing dramatic, just my keys in my hand, my coat on, and the front door softly shutting behind me. No one came after me. No one reached out that evening, but 30 days afterward, there were 46 missed calls, 19 voicemails, 75 text messages, and not a single one included the words, "I'm sorry." Now, before I share what took place after I walked away, you first need to know what brought me to that dinner table for the final time, clinging to the hope that maybe, just this once, they would actually notice me. They never did. Yet I remain uncertain about which pain was greater, being held responsible, or the fact that I almost accepted their version of things. Why did it take leaving for the truth to finally be spoken aloud? I was 6 years old when I was first accused of something I hadn't done. My older brother Preston, he was 9 at the time, had knocked over a lamp while chasing Tessa through the living room. I had been seated in the kitchen, coloring a horse on a blank page. But as soon as the lamp crashed, and my mother, Angela, came running with that sharp, panicked gasp, Preston didn't even pause. I was blamed. That was all it took to settle things. No one asked questions or verified the facts. All I heard was my mother's letdown in her words, and the distant whir of a vacuum, tidying what had never been my mess. That pattern played out like a script. If Tessa Carver forgot her lunch, I was singled out for having a voice that was too loud and supposedly distracted everyone. If my father, Samuel E. Carver, my father came home grumpy, it had to be because I had raised the thermostat again. If my older brother, Preston, missed his curfew, the reason was that I supposedly made him look bad with my never-failing responsibility. Our home rested quietly on a shaded street in Irondequoit, a green suburb just west of the heart of Rochester. From the curb, we looked like one of those families who belonged behind manicured shrubs, a Memorial Day flag, and Saturday synagogue. Behind our doors, we remained respectful, formal, restrained. Yet some rules were left unwritten. Never challenge my father. Never surpass my younger sister. Never bring up topics that would make anyone uneasy. Early on, I figured out how to make myself invisible while staying in plain sight. I kept my grades to myself. I chose my clothes to avoid drawing attention. I never shed a tear at memorials, not even when my grandmother passed in 2011. Later, I found her recipe card slipped into my bag, along with a note in her handwriting. "You see people for who they are, Morgan. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." I held on to that note. I still keep it with me. By 7th grade, I was the student teachers described as wise beyond my years. In secondary school, I was the organizer behind blood drives, I led the debate team, and I secured scholarships. Still, when I told my family that I'd been offered admission to Dartmouth with a comprehensive scholarship, only my mother, Angela Carver, responded in a way I remember, "That's so far away. Tessa's going to miss you." No words of congratulations or pride, just concern about how my departure would affect someone else. It wasn't only the things my family said, it was the silences in between. Nobody asked what I was interested in studying. No one offered help when I was moving. Nobody called the evening I first cried alone in a dorm room 350 meters from my family home. And when I returned for visits, it felt as though I'd never actually left, unless something went awry. Then, in an instant, I became the loose thread that caused everything to fall apart. Ever since I moved away, everything has felt different. My father grumbled once over Thanksgiving dinner. Tessa remarked, "Now it's like you act as if you're above us." It wasn't that I thought I was superior. I simply believed I might be able to discover who I truly was. But that was a mistake, because in this family, the moment I quit apologizing, I was cast as the issue. When my father began experiencing heart trouble 3 years ago, I acted as people expect daughters to. I packed up my Portland apartment, arranged a leave of absence from Pacific Beacon Creative, and headed back to New York for a while. At least, that's what I told myself. Just until I helped my father, Samuel, get through rehabilitation. Just until I demonstrated I still fit in. No one requested I return, but neither did they discourage me. At the beginning, I lived with them, Angela and Samuel Carver, my parents, both by title and by the miles that had separated us. I prepared meals. I drove my father to his cardiologist visits. I reorganized the kitchen so my mother wouldn't have to rummage through drawers to locate anything. I also started working remotely for Beacon Arrow Collective, a marketing firm out of Boston. Modest accounts, an adaptable schedule. It was something dependable, something manageable while I remained present. That idea, being present, was supposed to mean support, family, belonging. Yet in our household, it actually meant holding my tongue, obeying quietly, giving my time for free under the mask of affection. During the second week I was home, my mother handed me a paper full of chores, dry cleaning, a run to the grocery store, and collecting my nephew Eli from daycare. Just while my father, Samuel, gets some rest. Lately it's been overwhelming for me, I thought, folding up the list as though it were nothing unusual. And perhaps it was. Perhaps that's the way things always were, and I had simply forgotten how thoroughly expectation seeps into routine. At Saturday evening dinners, everything stayed the same. Preston would steer the conversation towards stories from his latest freelance assignments. Tessa aired out her frustrations over regulating screen time with her children. And as for me, I cleared away the plates. There was a time I tried to voice my thoughts. I remember mentioning, while we had dessert, that I might lease a little apartment in the city center, just so I could have my own area while I worked. Samuel stopped chewing halfway through his bite. "So, you're already working on your next getaway," he remarked. Tessa chuckled behind her wineglass. Preston only gave his head a slow shake. I wished I could clarify that it wasn't about leaving. It was about finding some space to breathe, but my instincts told me not to. That sort of straightforwardness had no place in my family. Instead, I managed a smile, volunteered to wash the dishes, and slipped upstairs to the guest bathroom to cry where nobody could hear me. That evening, I sent a message to Taylor Jong, a former colleague from Boston. "Have you ever had the feeling you returned home just to confirm you never should have?" Taylor replied, "After every visit with my mother, I feel that way." The next day, I gently suggested we change things up. Maybe we could alternate Saturday dinners. Tessa could host every other week, or we could take turns. Angela, without glancing up from the napkins she was folding, simply said, "You've been gone so long, the least you can do is this, Morgan." That unspoken expectation lingered in all the deep sighs, the fleeting looks, the gentle but undeniable loss of affection. Whatever I offered, I would always be trying to catch up. However far I traveled, there was always more I owed them. My belief was that I had returned to be of help. What I failed to realize was that I had stepped right back into the pattern they expected of me. My father, Samuel E. Carver. My family ran a small insurance brokerage on the east side of Rochester, called Carver and Holt Insurance Group. That business had been in our family for over 29 years. My grandfather, Franklin Sinclair, launched it in a renovated garage. My father later relocated it to a humble office suite near East Avenue. The business name was recognized by everyone around our neighborhood. When I returned, the sign out front had grown dingy, and the phones inside rarely rang. "The industry is evolving," my father explained when I pressed him. "These newer digital systems are disrupting everything." He delivered this as if it were unavoidable, as certain as extinction. I volunteered to help, not out of obligation, but because I believed I could resolve the issues. That was my natural way of operating. I would quietly repair things, never claim recognition, and always keep the peace. I chose not to insist, but instead, I was simply asked if I could review the branding, the website, and the client retention approach. In time, he agreed, though it was more out of weariness than genuine faith. Throughout the following 2 months, I spent late nights revamping the website, implementing automated reminders for clients, and creating small-scale local social media campaigns. I even refreshed the outdated office signs and arranged for new headshots for his staff, 3 assistants who hadn't received a raise in 4 years. Bit by bit, more people began calling, and new leads started to appear. At one point, he grumbled, "The phone hasn't been this busy in ages." I stayed silent, simply nodded, and poured another cup of coffee. Then my mother took me aside on a Saturday evening after dinner. She looked worn out and somehow older, despite her effort to mask it with pearls and lipstick. "There's something I want you to look at," she whispered, tucking a manila envelope into my purse. Later that evening, I opened it to find tax filings, statements from vendors, and correspondence from the bank. Among the pile, the most pressing was a foreclosure notice for the office lease, dated 4 weeks earlier. An icy feeling crept through my chest. Not only was the business floundering, it was rapidly going under, and my father had kept it secret from everyone. The next morning, I approached him with care. I arrived with spreadsheets in hand, along with a restructuring proposal. I carefully outlined my plan: trim our space, merge some services, and drop print advertisement contracts that had become obsolete. My father didn't shout. He wouldn't even meet my gaze. "So you think building a couple website projects means you know more than me? I've been at the helm of Carver and Holt Insurance Group since before you were born." Some pushback was what I'd braced myself for, but I hadn't foreseen how wounded my father would appear, not because of the financial facts, but because I dared to take charge of something he considered not just his legacy, but his very identity. In the end, though, the numbers forced his decision. The only way to resolve the debt was by securing another loan. Since my father's credit had taken a hit, and Preston and Tessa didn't meet the bank's criteria, the lender insisted on a co-signer. That meant it had to be me. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, forms spread out in front of us. "It's only a technicality," he assured me. "The business will make the payments. You won't be responsible for any of it." I paused because, deep down, I sensed something was wrong. But beneath that hesitation, I still longed for his approval and hoped this might finally earn it. So I agreed. 2 months after I signed the loan, the atmosphere in the house changed. My mother sent a text. Brief, icy, family meeting. Saturday 6 p.m. everyone. No explanations. No warmth. Gone were my mother's usual sunflowers or XOXO emojis. That was all she wrote. As I drove up, it was clear from the crowded driveway. Tessa's van, Preston's Jeep, Aunt Celeste's old Camry. A knot formed in my stomach. The front door wasn't locked. When I stepped into the living room, it resembled a courtroom. Every seat was already filled. My father, Samuel E. Carver, sat at the end of the couch with his hands clasped. My father sat in his recliner. My mother was perched next to him, knees pressed together, her fingers tightly entwined. My older brother Preston sat there like a sentinel. Tessa, my younger sister, looked right through me. Not a single person smiled. "Glad you found time," my father said in a level tone. "We need to have a conversation." I remained standing. Nobody offered me a seat. "There have been many changes you've made," he went on, "to the business, the image, and our whole way of doing things." Preston leaned in. "Our longtime clients say Carver and Holt Insurance Group just isn't the same anymore. They don't come by." Tessa folded her arms and glared. "It feels cold, fake, like it's no longer home." I carefully opened the folder I had brought. Inside were data reports, growth in our client base, positive reviews from new clients, and higher website traffic. Lead conversions have doubled since April. I was thinking, this isn't about the numbers, when my father's voice cut in sharply. "This isn't about statistics," he said. "It's about the harm that's been done." I swallowed hard. The room seemed to blur around the edges. My uncle cleared his throat. "You never cared to ask how we built things before. You simply showed up, acting like you already knew best." "She made Samuel get authorization to sign off on expenses," Preston added, as if he were just her employee. I glanced over at my mother, Angela. She didn't shed any tears. She simply refused to meet my gaze. "I accepted those conditions," my father said with a bitter tone, "because there wasn't another option. You kept flaunting your impressive credit standing at us." My breath seemed to freeze in my chest. "My intention was to keep everyone safe," I replied. "I didn't want any of us dragged down." The room was silent. Then my grandfather, Franklin Sinclair, a man whose hands crafted the first office desk I ever used, spoke gently. "We were so proud of you once, but now it's like you've forgotten what being part of this family is." Something inside me gave way. It wasn't loud, just a barely visible crack that I'd avoided acknowledging for far too long. I shifted in my seat. The folder stayed tight in my grasp. Nobody noticed. Did they imagine I wanted to be in charge? I whispered, "My intention was only to support. You requested this. You agreed." Tessa rose to her feet. "You got involved when you shouldn't have." I made everything center on me. "As usual, I destroyed this family," my father, Samuel, said, standing with effort. "I took something good and distorted it." My heart thudded loudly in my head. "We all put our faith in you," Preston said. "You made us look bad. You destroyed what Samuel worked for," Tessa concluded. That's when I heard the words that still echo sometimes in my sleep. "Leave." No one intervened. Nobody said my name. Nobody checked if I was all right. I glanced one last time at faces I recognized more than my own reflection, and suddenly understood his words hadn't shocked them. They had been anticipating this moment. So I set the folder down on the coffee table, turned around, and left the room. And still, nobody came after me. The flight from Rochester to Portland felt muted, and in a way, that made everything feel even stranger. Although I had just been cut off from my family, the airline kept pouring ginger ale. The passenger beside me watched a Marvel film without interruption. The clouds outside my window stretched on, indifferent and unbroken. I managed to hold back tears until I got to the Maplewood Guest Suite, an attic apartment close to the Alberta Arts District, with worn tiles in the kitchen and a futon that clattered awkwardly into a bed. I lowered myself onto the futon without removing my coat and fixated on the wall for almost 60 minutes. No thoughts, no plan, frozen in place. That evening, sleep never truly came. Not in any meaningful way. Each time I closed my eyes, I was transported back to the family room. The familiar voices, the identical faces, and that same line echoed in my mind. "You ruined this family." I left. I stayed silent. I exited through the front entrance, hoping my dignity remained intact. Or at least, that's what I tried to tell myself. Yet now, in a city where nobody recognized my face, that quiet seemed weightier than any blame I could ever receive. The following morning, I fell back on my usual ritual for when my world unraveled. I put pen to paper and started a list. Confirm my Portland office transfer with HR. Secure a long-term place to live. Arrange for internet service. Update my checking account with my new details. Pick up a new set of dishes. Underneath all that, I jotted down. I remind myself not to dwell on the past. That's much easier in theory than in reality. Ticking off each item feels like clearing debris only I can recognize. Even something as simple as selecting a new bath mat seems impossible. Just blue-gray. I lingered in indecision in the aisle for 5 minutes until a nearby child toppled a display, making me jump so suddenly that the mat slipped from my hands. The truth was, the mat wasn't at the heart of it. The real struggle lay in how little I knew about my own preferences anymore. For years my choices were molded by their opinions, dodging criticism, steering clear of arguments, and ensuring I never made waves. Who was I, and how could I manage without that? One afternoon, I found myself entering Bluefinch Coffee House simply to be somewhere I didn't have to justify myself. The barista had bird tattoos along both of her arms and a star-shaped nose ring. "First time here?" she asked, placing a ceramic mug in front of me. I gave a small nod. "First week in Portland," I told her, and she grinned. Not just politely, but with genuine warmth. Then, "Welcome. Everyone gets a new beginning one way or another." Her name was Jules Farrow. Jules remembered who I was the following day, and again the next. It might have been minor, but it marked the first occasion in weeks when someone spoke my name without a hint of letdown. That evening, I laundered my recently bought blue bath mat and placed it in front of the shower. I let my toes graze its surface. It didn't coordinate with anything else, and somehow, that made it just right. It happened on a Wednesday, 3 weeks into my new routine with the Portland office. The baristas at Bluefinch Coffee House recognized me by name. I had already chosen new drapes. I wasn't sleeping well, but I was sleeping. That was when I slipped up. I entered Quick Connect Mobile, planning to turn my temporary SIM into a permanent phone plan. The employee asked, "Want to keep your old number?" I was caught off guard. "Can I see the recent activity first?" I asked. He gave a casual shrug. "As long as you show the correct ID." Half an hour later, I was sitting behind the counter as he accessed the call history. He swiveled his screen toward me. The display overflowed with missed connections. 46 missed calls, 19 voicemails, and 9 D2 texts, all originating from Rochester. The initial voicemail played my father's voice, Samuel E. Carver. "You need to stop this. This is childish. Call us." The next message, from my mother, sounded frail but tense. "We're worried. This isn't helping anything." Third up was my younger sister, Tessa. "Seriously, you vanish and leave us with the fallout." I remained motionless while the clerk methodically clicked through the options. During the second week, the mood had transformed. The old sharpness faded, leaving only uncertainty. "Where are you, Morgan?" my mother asked. "Are you with anyone right now?" On the fourth week, everything turned frantic. The accounts at Carver and Holt Insurance Group were locked down. Preston said, "It's serious. You have to get in touch." Soon Tessa called again, her voice gentler this time. "I know you're angry, but my father hasn't been acting normal. The bank's involved now. We need you." And then the fifth week arrived. My father's voice trembled in his message. "Just return my call. I have to tell you what happened." The last message came from my mother. "Morgan, they've taken him into custody. The IRS showed up this morning. Please. I have no idea what to do." I offered no reply. The clerk glanced at me with doubt, unsure. Do you want printouts of the texts? I gave a silent nod. When I got back to my apartment, I arranged the printouts on the kitchen table like files from a crime scene. The messages unraveled, spiraling from anger into bewilderment. Bewilderment gave way to desperation. One came from Preston. You're involved in this. Your signature's everywhere. Don't pretend you know nothing. Then a message from Tessa. They're shutting down the Portland office. Monica Diaz, my lawyer, questioned why my name was on the forms, and finally, there was one from my mother, Angela. Please, sweetheart. We didn't intend for this. Come back. I hunched over the sink, gazing at the faucet until the burning faded from my eyes. Their calls weren't out of longing for me. They reached out because everything had fallen apart in my absence. As it turned out, the one they cast out was the person who had been holding everything together. And for the first time since leaving New York, I wondered if I would answer if they called again. I didn't know. But one thing was clear to me. They weren't seeking forgiveness. They wanted to be saved. The following morning, my phone rang again. A Rochester area code lit up the screen. Before I could allow myself to back out, I picked up the phone. This is Morgan Riley Carver. There was a pause on the other end. After a moment, it turned out to be Tessa. Do you have any idea how many calls it took to track down this number? I didn't give her any reply. Samuel was taken into custody. Monday at dawn, IRS agents arrived armed with paperwork and accusations. Charges include fraud and improper use of business accounts. She lowered her voice. And if you don't recall, my name is still connected to the loan. I remained composed. Monica has kept everything in order. All records and contract breaches have been filed with her. Tessa gave a derisive laugh. That's all? You're just abandoning the family. No, I distanced myself from the very people who told me I should leave. Don't you remember? She fell silent. So now you think this is strength? Really, it looks like selfishness. To me, it just means I stopped seeking validation from those who would never give it. The call ended at that point. There was no farewell. 4 days later, an email appeared in my inbox. The sender caught me off guard. The subject line read, "In Portland this weekend, would you meet for coffee?" Just me. No assumptions. It was from my mother. I stared at it for ages before finally responding. 1 hour. Smith Street Market, Sunday, 11 a.m. I arrived early and chose a tiny window table near the entrance, just to be safe. My mother showed up 5 minutes late, wearing her familiar Saturday synagogue coat, presentable but worn. She made no move to embrace me. "You look good," she remarked as she took her seat. "I am," I answered. We both ordered tea. The hush between us was tense, yet there was no animosity. Several sips in, I broke the silence. "Your father was sentenced," she said. 18 months, primarily probation. The authorities took the business and sold the family home. I nodded along. Monica Diaz, my lawyer, had already informed me. My mother gazed down at her napkin, creasing and uncreasing one edge repeatedly. I hadn't come out here just to revel in this. No. There was more unspoken stillness. Truly, I can't explain how things ended up like this. I locked eyes with her because nobody ever intervened, because someone always got blamed. And at last, I refused. She didn't protest. She only dipped her head a little. Then softly she asked, "Would you consider staying in contact?" Just the two of us. Maybe a call now and then. Nothing else. I stared out the window for quite a while before turning back to her. I was willing, but I needed her to know I was building a life here. A life that feels right. And I couldn't pretend to be fine if that wasn't true. She absorbed that. There was no resistance, no attempts to lay on guilt, just a gentle, I understand. I couldn't be sure she actually did, but there was no argument. In my family, that counted as a step forward. We said goodbye without embracing. She exited through the main door. I went out the side entrance. 7 months after I left New York, Portland gave me a sense of belonging I never found in Rochester. My place was small, but it belonged to me. I picked out the paint and the kitchenware myself. Even the vintage wood desk near the window, which I sanded and painted myself on a drizzly Saturday, felt like regaining something lost. I took in a senior cat from Rose City Animal Haven. Baxter, my one-eyed tabby, would welcome me back each evening with a raspy meow and absolutely no demands. There was an unspoken understanding between us. Beacon Arrow Collective had formally offered me the lead position at the new Portland office. Without thinking twice, I accepted. I'd established new routines for myself. Mornings were spent wandering through Peninsula Park. I spent afternoons in Bluefinch Coffee House, where Jules Farrow never forgot my usual. Evenings were spent quietly, reading books I alone had chosen. I hadn't heard anything from my younger sister Tessa, not after that phone call. My older brother Preston kept his distance too. My mother Angela called me once a month. Our talks were brief and cautious. No apologies were made, but I had also stopped pretending nothing had happened. My father, Samuel, never made any effort to contact me. I hadn't actually anticipated hearing from him. Legal matters proceeded in my absence. Monica Diaz, my lawyer, handled all the necessary requirements. I took care of the obligations that were mine. That was it. No more, no less. That was the real transformation. I stopped overextending myself for others. I didn't bother offering explanations anymore. I simply lived according to what felt right for me. A rainy November morning found me at the waterfront, watching ferries glide along the Sound while I wrapped my scarf tightly against the chilly air. My mind returned to that evening in New York, when I stood amid a crowd of people I once considered family, and finally heard the words that shattered the illusion. You destroyed this family. Leave. Now it wasn't my absence that had caused their collapse. They had come undone because I had spent years holding the family together while nobody recognized it. Or perhaps they just refused to acknowledge it. And that was a weight I no longer needed to bear. I no longer sought closure. I wasn't expecting anyone to apologize. I felt at peace. It wasn't the peace that comes from fixing things or being forgiven. Instead, it was the kind born of realizing I didn't have to remain silent for anyone anymore. Just as I turned to go, my phone vibrated. It was a message from my mother. Thinking of you today. Hope you're well. Without agonizing over it, I sent back my response. I am. Hope you are too. That was all I needed to say. For the first time ever, I felt at home only within myself, and that was a greater gift than I'd ever received.